This is VOA Africa. Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori. As to give you what is off today. It is Friday, August the 7th, and this is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees, so our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We are working to help keep you informed about what is going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. The long-running dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia over the Nile River Dam project remains unresolved. And on the streets of Cairo, Ethiopian residents say racism and hostilities against them are intensifying. The scams that rains in Ethiopia are filling the reservoir of the controversial dam upstream, a development Egyptians say is an existential threat. VOA's Heather Murdoch reports from Istanbul with Hamada Alassane in Cairo.
300 million people depend on the Nile River to survive. And in Egypt, 95% of the population lives along the river. Last month, Ethiopia began filling a reservoir upstream from Egypt. The reservoir is part of a nearly $5 billion dam project Ethiopia says will provide electricity to 65 million people and help lift the country out of poverty. But Egypt sees the possibility of lower water levels as a threat to its very existence. Egypt hosts more than 100,000 refugees from sub-Saharan Africa, and many of them say they are subject to open hostility on the streets because of the dispute over the dam.
We escaped the Ethiopian government and their injustice to come here. But here we are tormented because we are Ethiopian.
Huru says there has been a rise of hate speech, harassment, and violence against Ethiopians, or people perceived to be Ethiopian, raising fear among the refugees. With increased racism, even simple things are more difficult, say refugee advocates.
For example, one young Sudanese man tried to get on a microbus, and the driver said to him, "You're Ethiopian, and you want to block our water. Blacks are not allowed on this microbus."
Online, Egyptians and Ethiopians taunt each other. Ethiopian TikTok users suggest Egypt will be completely cut off from the Nile. Egyptian users retort with posts about Egypt's considerable military prowess. And locals say the online bickering is fueling growing tensions on the ground.
The
videos provoke people to anger. They show people claiming they can stop our country from getting water, as is our right.
Critics of Egypt say the country has long used its power to bully its neighbors and control the Nile. Critics of Ethiopia say, without a legally binding agreement regulating the use of the dam, the country could devastate its downstream neighbors and violate international law. Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan are still in talks trying to negotiate a deal, as the reservoir is slowly being filled up. But sub-Saharan refugees in Egypt say the anger on the ground is misdirected against them. They say, if Egyptians go thirsty, we will go thirsty too. Heather Murdoch, VOA News in Istanbul, with Hamada Al-Rassam in Cairo.
Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara has formally accepted the nomination of the ruling party to be its presidential candidate in October's election. Opponents say third term for Ouattara is against the constitution. Ouattara told supporters of the rally of the Republican Party is accepting the call to run in the interest of the nation and in order to continue putting his experience at the service of the nation. Ouattara's opponents say the two-term limit in the Constitution bars him from running again, but Ouattara says his first 2 terms do not count under the new Constitution adopted in 2016. Africa on Friday has reached a grim new COVID-19 milestone, topping 1 million cases of coronavirus, according to Reuters. The disease is now spreading rapidly across a continent whose relative isolation had spared it the worst of the pandemic. Nearly 22,000 people have died from the highly contagious disease. but over 676,000 people have recovered. South Africa, which is the world's fifth worst hit nation, and it makes up more than 50% of the sub-Saharan African cases, has recorded more than 538,000 infections. Public health services in the country are overwhelmed, and there are shortages of beds, protective gear, and nurses. COVID-19 patients sometimes have to be treated alongside non-coronavirus patients. The South African mortuaries that are running out of space and coffins are now storing bodies in refrigerated shipping containers. The African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says 10 countries account for the vast majority of the new COVID-19 testing taking place in Africa. Emma McCarthy reports.
10 countries account for 80% of new coronavirus testing taking place across Africa, a regional body said on Thursday, indicating that little testing is taking place in many countries around the vast continent. That as confirmed cases of COVID-19 across Africa accelerate and are very close to hitting 1 million this week. Experts say low levels of testing in many countries could mean infection rates are higher than reported. Some governments in the region are too poor or conflict-ridden to carry out widespread testing. Others are reluctant to share data or to expose their crumbling health systems to outside scrutiny. So far, nearly 9 million tests have been conducted across the continent, up 9.4% from last week's tally. South Africa still has the highest number of cases across the continent. The first members of a surge team of health experts from the World Health Organization have arrived in Johannesburg to help bolster the country's response to the pandemic.
That was Emma McCarthy of Reuters with that report. Uganda's crumbling public hospitals, doctor strikes and corruption scandals make its success in fight against coronavirus all the more unlikely. But at what price? Joe Davis explains.
With its crumbling public hospitals, doctors' strikes and corruption scandals, few would have predicted that Uganda would be a COVID-19 success story. The nation of 42 million people has recorded just over 1,200 cases and only 5 deaths since March. Uganda closed schools and banned large gatherings 3 days before confirming its first case on March the 21st. By the end of March, most businesses were shut, vehicle movement was banned, and an overnight curfew was in force. But critics say Uganda's success in tackling coronavirus has come at a cost. Some pregnant women died in labour, unable to reach hospitals because of travel restrictions. Many jobs have been lost. And economic growth is set to plunge from 5.6% last year to just 0.4% this year, according to the World Bank. Opposition leaders accuse the government of using the pandemic as an excuse to restrict political gatherings and arrest opponents, charges the government denies. Though Uganda's approach has its critics, that it has been different to other African nations is not in doubt. Others didn't impose such strict measures, and those that were imposed were lifted long before infections had peaked. Uganda's response to COVID-19 was shaped by its experience of battling deadly infectious diseases like Ebola, public health experts have said. The East African nation was already on alert because of an Ebola outbreak in the neighbouring Democratic Republic of Congo when the pandemic began. Uganda is now easing its lockdown, and many are pleased about it, as they haven't worked in months.
That was Reuters' Joe Davis reporting. Lebanon's Chernobyl. That is how some are describing the mammoth blast that shook the capital city, Beirut, and left thousands wounded. 300,000 people lost their homes and a number of hospitals sustained major damage. Among the signs of international support was a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron, who got a first-hand look at the worst affected neighborhood. And Charles Vora reports from Beirut.
Beirut, once known as Paris of the East, again looks like a war zone, ravaged by an explosion that has been described as near nuclear in its intensity. Young men and women have begun to clear the roads of shards of glass, so it is easier for people to reach their homes and find those missing. Dozens are said to be buried under the debris. So far, over 130 have died and more than 5,000 injured.
More problems, more crises. We already have many crises, economical crisis, corona, everything, and then with this, we're out of everything.
The injured were rushed to hospitals, but they too bore the brunt of the blasts. St. George University Hospital, one of the city's biggest, evacuated hundreds of patients. Some could not be saved. Several died, as well as a number of nurses. With no time to waste, the hospital is already appealing for help to rebuild and restart operations.
Any support will be helpful for the hospital, especially the fundraising from the state, from everywhere.
As signs pointed to an explosion caused by a large amount of ammonium nitrate improperly stored at a warehouse, despite warnings, activists called for an independent probe. After months of anti-government demonstrations, mistrust in the leadership is very much in the air. France's visiting president on Thursday was met by chants from those critical of Lebanon's politicians. Emmanuel Macron offered aid and called on Lebanon's ruling elite to promptly usher in real reforms.
I want to be able to listen, understand, and help organize international aid, support, and assistance to Beirut and the people of Lebanon.
From Israel attacks to Syrian boots on the ground and the 80s civil war, the Lebanese have lived through catastrophe more than once. But no amount of experience could have prepared anyone for this. Once again, the people of this city are picking up the pieces. Anshul Vora for VOA News, Beirut.
Following anti-racism protests in several U.S. cities in June, a number of American brands and cafes announced plans to rename and rebrand their businesses. Max Karina Befredian has the story.
Washington, D.C.'s iconic football team, the Washington Redskins, have always had a problem with their name. Many people see the term Redskins as an offensive term for this country's Native Americans. Despite the long-running problem, team owner Daniel Snyder for years refused to change the name. But in the face of this summer's anti-racism protest, Snyder relented and the team jettisoned the name. For now, DC's team is the Washington football team. Snyder isn't alone in taking a second look at some businesses that have racially charged names. Owner of the DC-based coffee shop Colony Club, Max Zuckerman, says he's also thinking about renaming his venue.
It was something that we had been thinking about for a while. So when we opened 5 years ago, I named the shop after my grandparents' flower shop that was on the same street like 50 years ago.
The owner of another cafe in Washington, D.C., Call Your Mother, decided to review his interior decor and take down a picture of rapper Drake, as well as rename some of the meals on the menu. Some of them were named after famous African Americans. In a statement, the restaurant's owners said they have not done enough to show what they have always known to be true, that Black lives matter. In response to this move, many frequenters of the venue left their comments reassuring the owner that a sandwich named after Rihanna has not offended them at all. And though many might see these actions as controversial in the context of fighting racism, experts believe this tendency is a good one.
I think it is important for restaurants to make their position very clear. I can't imagine a restaurant saying that they don't think Black lives matter.
The wave of rebrandings that started in early June doesn't seem to be going away. One of the first companies to retire their name and symbol was Aunt Jemima pancake syrup, which has featured a Black woman on their product for over 100 years. Karina Befredian for VOA News, Washington.
We are excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a new music video by Kenya's Sauti Soul in collaboration with South Africa's Soweto Gospel Choir. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Linor Moudou, your VOA health correspondent.
Let us be perfectly clear.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the World Health Organization says there is no information or evidence suggesting that the coronavirus can be transmitted by mosquitoes.
There are 2 published studies.
It is a respiratory virus which spreads primarily through droplets, generated when an infected person coughs or sneezes, or through droplets of saliva or discharge from the nose.
This happens during pandemics in the past.
For more information on COVID-19, visit who.int or contact your local or national health authorities.
Due to concerns about the spread of the coronavirus, a growing number of U.S. states are expanding options for voting by mail-in instead of in person for the November presidential election. Voting by mail has a long history in the U.S., dating back to the Civil War. However, President Donald Trump claims mail-in voting will lead to election fraud or months of uncertainty following the vote. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara reports on how a routine voting option is becoming a central political debate of the 2020 election.
Some New Yorkers braved the threat of coronavirus and voted in person in the June Democratic primary. But many voted by mail, flooding an unprepared election system. 6 weeks later, election results in some districts still haven't been called. President Donald Trump has repeatedly warned that if states rely on mail-in balloting for the November presidential poll, the same kind of delays could take place.
You won't know the election result for weeks, months, maybe years after. Maybe you'll never know the election result, and that's what I'm concerned with. It'll be fixed, it'll be rigged.
Election officials say voter fraud in the U.S. is extremely rare, even when it comes to mail-in voting. Most states allow voting by mail, but this year many expect they will need extra time to count the large number of ballots during the pandemic. It wouldn't be the first time U.S. election results are delayed. The controversial decision on the 2000 race between Al Gore and George W. Bush was delayed for more than a month because of recounts in Florida. The upcoming November poll could be even more controversial.
We're in a hyper-polarized environment right now, and so any window where a candidate can claim that there's some sort of, chicanery happening behind the scenes is a problem. The big problem this time is it's not just going to be one state. It's not going to be one Florida. I think that there are a good 3 or 4, maybe 5 states where it could take that week.
While Trump has walked back his suggestion that the election should be delayed, he has continued to raise doubts and suspicion about mail-in voting.
If more of his supporters vote in person and he's ahead on election night, he could claim, as he's already suggested, that the mail-in ballots that are coming in are fraudulent and try and claim victory.
On Wednesday, Trump's campaign sued the state of Nevada, led by Democrats, over a plan to send mail-in ballots to all registered voters. But in the battleground state of Florida, led by Republicans, the president is encouraging voting by mail, saying its current and past governors cleaned up the state's election system, making it safe and secure.
The 2 governors, between the both of them, they've really got a great system of absentee ballots and even in the case of mail-in ballots.
Polls show more Americans want to vote by mail in November, but there's a growing divide about whether it's truly secure.
Democrats are much more likely than Republicans to say right now that they'd like to vote by mail.
Expanding the pool of voters participating in some states will help Biden. In others, such as Florida, it's expected to benefit Trump. Whoever wins, election analysts say the main challenge will be ensuring both parties see the result as credible. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is leading in the polls over incumbent President Donald Trump, but must rally and unite his party's progressive wing while appealing to the broader electorate if he hopes to win November's presidential election. The continuing coronavirus pandemic makes traditional campaigning difficult, and Biden campaign officials now say he will not travel to his party's convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to accept the presidential nomination. VOA's Mike O'Sullivan reports on the strengths and vulnerabilities of the man Democrats hope will win the White House.
It's an election year like few others. High unemployment, social unrest, and people facing the risk of infection from a raging pandemic. All factors contributing to President Donald Trump's poor polling performance in the battleground states where the November election may be decided. And the battleground is expanding to some traditional Republican strongholds. Good news for Joe Biden.
If you go back 10 years, I don't think you'd find many people saying that Arizona and Texas and even Georgia would be all that competitive.
But this year they are. Biden was Barack Obama's vice president and played a major role in his administration. Elected to the Senate at age 29, Biden is an experienced politician.
I'm going to say something outrageous. I know how to make government work.
He is someone who's been through great tragedies in his life, with the death of his first wife and daughter in a car accident.
Then in 2015, he lost his oldest son, Beau, to cancer. His personal tragedies and his long tenure in politics are perhaps reasons why his political opponents find it hard to generate the same hostility as they did for the last Democratic nominee.
Crooked Hillary Clinton.
Lock her up! Lock her up!
But even Biden supporters admit he lacks charisma, which might be a problem, say analysts.
He is bland, and the blandness normally would hurt him more than it does against Donald Trump. It actually gives people a very sharp, distinct choice.
Biden survived a bruising primary contest, beating a long list of presidential contenders.
Struggling against Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, that he truly is a moderate. He is not a radical left-wing thinker.
His choice of a running mate could expand his appeal.
It's not going to change large masses of voters, but it might make a difference at the margins.
Yet some voters say they are unhappy with the choice being offered in this election.
There are a group of voters that have since become labeled as haters, and they are voters who don't like either candidate for president, but feel they have to vote.
And in this unprecedented election, every vote is important. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
In our entertainment, Kenya's top Afro-pop band Sauti teams up with Soweto Gospel Choir to bring us brighter days. And now for Friday entertainment, Heather Maxwell, host of Music Time in Africa, presents her Song of the Week with Kwame Ofori. This Kenya-South Africa collaboration brings or seeks to bring positivity and hope with the promise of brighter days.
Hello, everyone. Kwame and I have an amazing song for you to kick off your weekend. It is called Brighter Days by Kenyan amazing group Sauti Soul.
Yep, let's get right into it.
Maxwell and Kwame Ofori with a hot video from Kenyan performers Sauti Soul called Brighter Days. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching and have a great weekend.